We are now just 34 days away from the Texas U.S. Senate primary, and new polling shows a tight race for the Republican nomination. Here to break down the data and much more is DDHQ Chief Elections Analyst Geoffrey Skelley. Hey, Geoffrey, so what can you tell us about that key Republican primary? It's really one of the most hotly contested races across the country over there in Texas.
Yes, well, look, the situation is that the GOP primary in Texas is very competitive and very much up in the air. You have incumbent Republican Senator John Cornyn seeking re-election. However, he is not doing too well for an incumbent. In our polling average right now, he's polling just a bit south of 30%, which is a pretty weak position for an incumbent to be in. He's just behind State Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is challenging him essentially from the right in this primary. It's very much like a lot of Republican primaries, been a bit of a contest of who is the best ally of Trump, who is most MAGA. And Cornyn, who has a long history, has been in the Senate for quite a long time, is very associated with sort of establishment Republican politics, is maybe having a tough time making that case. On the other side, Paxton has a number of personal and professional scandals in his background that makes a lot of Republicans in Washington antsy about the possibility he could be the Republican nominee, because he actually might be the weakest general election candidate, which might open the door for Democrats to have a shot in Texas. Though they've come close there, they have not won a statewide race in Texas since 1994, so it's been a while. And the third player in this race is Wesley Hunt, who is a congressman from Texas, and he's essentially trying to I think, go between both Paxton and Cornyn here by being a MAGA-friendly conservative Republican who is a fresh face. And right now he's running in third in sort of the mid-teens in our polling average. And all told, this might make it very difficult for any one candidate to win a majority of the vote, which is necessary for a nomination in Texas, and might therefore force a primary runoff.
Yeah, so it looks like we could be heading for that runoff situation. Do we have any data on what could change if there's only two candidates in the race?
Right. So polls have asked this, as different versions of what would happen if Cornyn faced Paxton, or Cornyn faced Hunt, or Hunt faced Paxton, depending on who finishes first and second in the primary, and if no one does indeed get a majority in that first round. And overall, it would seem that Paxton may have a slight edge over Cornyn. Hunt might have a slight edge over Paxton, but you do have a lot of undecideds in these polls, of course. I will say that before Wesley Hunt jumped into this race in the fall, Ken Paxton pretty consistently led John Cornyn in head-to-head polling. We knew that those two were running for a long time, and Hunt only got in the race in October, and that sort of further scrambled what was already a very close and messy contest. But Paxton did consistently lead, which would seem to suggest that Cornyn has some weakness that he's going to need to overcome. And so far, even though he has gotten millions and millions of dollars in outside support in trying to shore up his position, Cornyn has not really greatly improved, which I think is probably not a great sign for his chances.
Moving over to South Carolina, another key Republican race is the June primary for governor. What can you tell us about what we're seeing there?
Right. So the name that people may know best in this race is Representative Nancy Mace from South Carolina. But it's really a four-way contest that is very crowded. And I think if we're expecting the Texas Senate race to go to a runoff on the Republican side, this race has all the makings of going to a runoff. South Carolina and Texas, like a number of southern states, require a majority to win a primary, to win a nomination. So that forces you into a runoff situation. A lot of other states don't have that rule, but that's a factor you have to consider here. So running against Mace, you have the state attorney general, Alan Wilson. You have the lieutenant governor, Pamela Yvette. And you have another representative in the U.S. House, Ralph Norman, running. And so you have four candidates. Three of them right now are pretty close to 20% in our polling average. So very much a muddle, with Norman behind in fourth place in the sort of 10, 11% range. So overall, it's another messy contest where there's no clear front runner.
All right, on to President Trump. He continues to struggle with low approval ratings. What's the latest on what we're seeing there?
Sure. So at the moment, his approval rating is at around 55%, or sorry, his disapproval rating is at around 55%, and his approval rating is around 41, 42%. Those numbers move a little bit each day in our polling average, but he's more or less at one of his lowest, if not the lowest points he's been at during his time in his second term in office. And so we're about a year into his second term here. And I think, if you're sort of looking at what's going on and what's sort of below the below the top line there, what is happening, I think you can look at independence as being a major problem for the president. He did well enough with that group to win the presidential election in 2024, but now his approval rating is in the 30s among independents. His disapproval rating is up into nearly the mid 60s. And that, I think, represents a lot of dissatisfaction with the economic situation in the country. We have a lot of polling showing people are worried about that, don't feel like Trump has sort of met the promises he made to sort of stabilize the economy and make people feel better about their financial situation. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world in terms of international involvement that I think is not polling terribly great for the president. And also, perhaps his strongest issue has been immigration as a politician since he first came on the scene ahead of the 2016 election, and the one where I think people most associate with him. But the problem for him is that obviously, given some of the recent events in places like Minneapolis and things involving ICE and the Department of Homeland Security that are not polling great, the approval rating for ICE has slid. Approval ratings of Trump's handling of immigration have slid, and so one of his traditional strengths is now maybe a bit hobbled. And I think that's also contributing to his overall troubles.
Midterm elections usually don't bode well for the party of the president. The President Trump is trying to defy what we've seen traditionally. I would think that having a approval rating so low is probably not seen as something that could buck the trend of what we usually see in midterm elections.
Right. So the president's party traditionally loses seats in a midterm election in races for the U.S. House of Representatives, which is the only real national election happening. There are 435 seats. They're all on the ballot. Senate, only about a third of the Senate is up every 2 years because of the staggered 6-year terms in the Senate. So the House is really the place where we see this play out and this national effect. And the president's party usually loses ground. Now, the degree to which it loses ground is pretty closely associated with just how poorly the president's approval is doing. So in this case, President Trump doesn't have the worst approval by any means of a president looking ahead to their second midterm election. In this case, obviously, he's in his second term. But nonetheless, being in the low 40s is definitely a position in terms of his approval rating where you would expect a decent number of lost seats for the Republicans, at least historically. And while I do think Republicans are aided a bit by the fact that things are more polarized in our country right now, there are fewer seats that are truly competitive because most seats are relatively safe. Some of that has to do with gerrymandering. Some of that has to do with just people self-sorting and areas tending to be darker blue and darker red than they used to be. There are just fewer competitive areas in the country. So that produces fewer competitive seats as well. But nonetheless, there are enough competitive seats that if Republicans lose most of those seats, in part because President Trump's approval ratings in the low 40s, they will lose control of the U.S. House of Representatives, where they have an extremely narrow majority.
All right, something we will continue to follow. For now, we'll leave it at that. Geoffrey Skelley, Chief Elections Analyst at DDHQ. Thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thank you for having me.